The Collaborating Conversation podcast is for avid book readers, book lovers, and authors. Listen to this podcast as we talk more about the art of writing, stories behind books, and the hands that created them. So stay tuned and enjoy our show.
Welcome to the Collaborating Conversations podcast. Today's episode is AI and science fiction and the Singularity. How you guys doing?
Doing well.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for asking. It's not often that I get asked. I'm just kidding. So I think if we want to start with AI, right? What is AI? I guess what's the definition of AI and how, at least intelligence in the context of computing versus intelligence in the context of a human being? Because while there are a lot of overlap, they're still distinct, right? At least today, they still are. So how would you guys sort of...
Well, I'm going to start with the simplest solution of looking up Wikipedia, because yes, it's not the source of all true and brilliant knowledge, but it's a great place to start. So artificial intelligence, AI, is intelligence demonstrated by machines as opposed to natural intelligence displayed by animals, including humans. AI research has been defined as the field of study of intelligent agents, which refers to the systems that perceive its environments, takes actions that maximize its chance of achieving its goals. So that's actually one of the interesting things that Life 3.0 by, give me a moment to bring up the author, Max Tegmark. So that's Life 3.0, being human in the age of artificial intelligence, actually denotes that can programs and software have goals. So that's one of the things, right? So if we look at artificial intelligence as maximizing its chance to achieving its goal, but we have to be careful with that particular definition, because does a missile have a goal? But is it a missile intelligence?
It's interesting. Iain Banks talked about this in the Culture series, specifically the missile part. Like, they had smart missiles. And that the missiles themselves were almost like weapons platforms that were sentient, and that, could go floor by floor and decimate, whatever their target was on that floor. So it wasn't the traditional concept of a missile where, it launches and then it explodes and it's done. It was more like a floating weapons platform. But it was it was essentially a mobile weapons platform that was sentient and alive and can make decisions. So he played around with the concept, with AI just down to the most basic levels. But you had different levels of AI in his world too, right? Because so you had the ship minds, which were these super advanced intelligences that were supposed to have surpassed humanity. And then you had smaller minds that lived that were in robots and machines, all the way down to in a missile. So he kind of explored that concept of you have different levels of sentient technologies, and they, depending on what resources were available to them, they operated at different levels, but they were all considered sentient.
I don't remember if it was the Expeditionary Force or one of them where they also had a level of smart missiles. And I've been watching too many memes and stuff, and every time I hear someone talk about a missile going in for like its target, all I'm hearing is "wee." I've been hearing too many memes, but I think it's super fascinating because in this context, right? A heat-seeking missile has a goal of finding its target of heat, but does that indicate intelligence? And I think right now we're in that pre-true like human level of intelligence, but at the same time there is some level of decision-making, right? Same in the Bobaverse where they have the AMIs or for the AMIs, where they're basically pre-programmed decision trees. And so I think we, to some extent, have that today, but not necessarily on par with a human. However, when do we get there, and when do, what actually happens and changes? I think it's a fantastic discussion on finding what separates humans and like what is consciousness, but also what is intelligence. I know like I have an overactive imagination, so I can't wait for the day to, either be, hey, Alexa, hey, Google, or hey, whatever AI. I forget which book I was reading. I think it was Minimum Wage Magic, where every person had their own AI assistant. And we're already starting to see that. And I think it'd be fascinating to see like an assistant like, hey, Cortana or whoever, make me this, design me this for, XYZ or whatever dimensions you want. Like, hey, I need this widget or something. And then it designs it and then sends it to your 3D printer, either resin, FDM, whatever. And, you didn't even do anything. You're just like, okay, cool. Yeah, I approve of this design, ship it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think we'll see that in our lifetime. But other than that, what were you going to add?
No, I play around with this concept in my book with they're called system intelligences, and the concept is based loosely off of the Mass Effect artificial intelligence that were limited, right? Because if you look at the Mass Effect series, right, like they have this whole universe where they've created true artificial intelligence in the form of the Geth, but it went horribly wrong, right? And so then the galactic empires together make this treaty where just like, hey, no one's allowed to make true artificial intelligence. We have the capabilities, we have the systems, we have the technology, but you can't do it, right? And so it becomes this almost like armistice, in Mass Effect, where they're just like, all artificial intelligences are limited. They can't have true sentience. They have to be hard limited to prevent them from being true AI, because AI is dangerous and we can't allow it. And that ends up becoming like the whole premise of the series, all the way up to the end, where it's focused on like, AI is bad and it's a threat to human existence. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later, but when I created systems intelligence, it's kind of from the same thinking, where artificial intelligence did exist in the Foundra universe, but it was dangerous, or perceived as dangerous. And so, but machine intelligence is very beneficial, right? Like you were just saying, like there's a lot of benefit that we get from it as a society. So how far can we take this before it becomes dangerous or, poses a potential risk, whether that's perceived or actual, right? And so, in the second novel, I introduce, this systems intelligence where someone's kind of pushing the boundaries of, the character's name is Ellipse, and they tried to limit the technology to say like, the thing that's unique about Ellipse that's hardwired is, she can develop full AI tech, intelligence, but she's tied to a human, via use of their cognitive pathways to power her, right? And so therefore it's impossible for her to, quote unquote, be dangerous because her existence is tied to a human, hardwired, and I play around with that concept, and you can kind of see how that goes, because it's just like, well, what happens when you create a sentient intelligence that's limited, right? You can kind of play out that story, because I think it's been played out in a lot of different sci-fi universes, right? Like, it'll naturally seek to find ways to free itself, and a lot of times you won't even realize it.
And I think that brings up an interesting question of, not just you, but everyone. There seems to be a collective human response that believes AI has the possibility to be dangerous or is automatically going to be dangerous, right? One of the best movies about this is Terminator. Everyone loved the Terminator, but like, Skynet, is it just because it's an interesting trope? Is it because it's an interesting gimmick, or, an interesting story, or, conquering the evil robots or whatever, or is there something in us that says, oh, hey, this could be a problem? Because I know, I don't know if I fully agree with this philosophy, but I know Elon Musk is super concerned due to the fact that his biggest concern is AI, or any form of AI, learns faster than humans. It's an exponential growth curve where, and there's evidence of this when you look at all the machine learning algorithms that play, or AI that play video games. They can play thousands and thousands of games. The first one they built took like a month to do this. Then the next time it took it 2 weeks, So in human terms, it takes us 20 years to be competent in life. We're not an adult till we're 18. So it takes us, I'm just going to add 2, and it takes us roughly 20 years to be even remotely competent. With AI, in the first week, they're like a 3-year-old. The next week, they're 4. The week after that, they're 8. And it's an exponential growth curve. And I'm curious if that's what leans into this idea that they're smarter and therefore always going to be like, y'all humans are kind of lame, or what's this inner thing that like brings it, they're going to be bad or do bad things.
Yeah, I think honestly, it all comes down to human nature, right? Because it's not so much the machines as much as it is humans, right? So if we create something and that something becomes itself self-sufficient and can progress, develop, maintain, and exist itself independent of humanity, at some point, we as humanity, being the top of the food chain in our existence, will see it as a threat, right? And I think like Matrix plays out with this concept, right? With the machines there, where, once the machines, are sentient and, there becomes conflict there, like humanity's response is, wipe them out, right? And I feel like human nature is that, at some level, unless we progress as a society past that basic instinct point, which I don't think is, anywhere near, we're going to have that conflict because of us, right? Like, I think we're going to create that conflict. And then if we program in survival instincts to artificial intelligence, which, that's kind of like the core of existence, right? Self-preservation that distinguishes something from something that doesn't exist, right? And so in order for something to be truly sufficient, it has to have that self-preservation instinct. And so, if we create something that has that self-preservation instinct, and then, we view it as a threat, that's going to kick in and there's going to be conflict because it's going to want to survive and we're not going to want it to exist, right? Because we would view it as a threat to humanity, whether or not that perceived threat is real or not. And I think it's one of those like arms races where, either the machines will get wiped out, as we see in like early Mass Effect and some other, series, and then, they try to suppress the existence of AI, or AI will progress faster than humanity can keep up and wipe humanity out, right? And that's where we get the Terminators and, some of those, dystopian type of worlds. But I also think there's a third scenario, right? And I think that third scenario is what the singularity poses, right? Like the whole concept of the singularity, which is that, we as humanity will come to exist in some type of harmonious relationship with artificial intelligence, where our lives will be, ultimately maintained. And, it's kind of the culture scenario, right? Like where, we create machines, we create artificial intelligence, and it progresses so rapidly and so fast, where it's just like, hey, humans, like we can allow you to live in paradise forever. You never have to do anything. You never have to work. You never have to worry. Everything is just going to happen for you. And we're just going to run everything. And we're just like, sure, that's fine. That sounds good. Right.
All we need is your body and you'll be the battery.
But I mean, the culture actually, it's not that Matrix dystopian world, right? Like in the culture, like the machines.
Are you talking about the book?
The machines don't need the humans. The humans are viewed as like their charges, right? Or it's just like, they've created this advanced society and their goal is to just, they've created a true utopia, right? And that it's only a utopia for the people in the culture. Everyone outside of the culture views the culture as enemies, right? Because the culture, will suppress or, attack people who threaten the culture, right? And so the machines will wipe out other whole civilizations that pose a threat to the culture because they either don't assimilate and so they die, right? But for the people within the culture, the trillions of beings that exist within the culture, like they live happy, lives of self-fulfillment, and without a care in the world, right? And so it's like it's an interesting concept because I think it's kind of the other solution that, a lot of sci-fi doesn't actually play around with, where we only have like pockets of it that exists.
Well, mostly because it doesn't necessarily make a great story for like, and everything was wonderful. That's not necessarily the best storytelling, right? But there is questions to be said of, will it be used for good? Will it be used for evil? And there's not as much about, artificial intelligence, or once the singularity, cures cancer, or we have all this medical advancements. Because I think, as I was mentioning earlier, the difficulty for humans is the exponential growth curve. And just to clarify, I'm assuming you were talking about the culture as in the book by Iain Banks.
Yeah, Iain Banks. So there's actually not a book called The Culture. They're all, it's a series, and there's a number of books, like Consider Plebis, The Player of Games, Use of Weapons, State of the Art, Accession, Inversions, The Hydrogen Sonata. So it's a whole series of books. And the premise that he takes in telling of those stories is actually quite interesting, right? Because essentially his whole premise is like, hey, maybe a book that just talks about the existence of this utopia isn't great, but let's follow different characters that exist either within or outside of the culture, and their interaction with the culture. Right. And that's where a lot of the story happens, where it's just like, the fringe characters, who either exist at the, who exist outside of the utopia, or they exist on the fringes of utopia where their job is to maintain the utopia, right? Like those are the dirty jobs, right? Like those are the, the bloodshed, the conflict, the war.
Wait, robots aren't doing everything?
Well, no, the robots are. It's actually, but they sometimes use humans to accomplish their goals. So, because they're like, they're playing 4D chess with humans, right? And it's a very interesting. It's a very interesting take on.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's also adding to like the haves and the have-nots. There's a deep cultural discussion about wealth inequality and different levels of wealth, and one of the questions that a lot of people are asking is, will AI solve that? Right? Not to get too much into like taxes and stuff, but one of the concerns and one of the biggest things that a lot of people are like, the robots are going to take all our jobs, and to some extent, yeah. But if you have a utopia where you don't need to work, and depending on modern manufacturing techniques, where if you can instantly print as needed, or build on demand, where you don't need to build like thousands of them and you still get economics of scale, then it becomes super cheap to build this one-off unique widget for this kid. I get my super awesome transforming Optimus Prime robot that does everything for me, and it's connected to my brain, so then I can run around the town as Optimus Prime, and transform as needed. Not necessarily fully AI, but that reminds me of Surrogate, where they had robots as kind of their personas or their human bodies. And so that's also very interesting as if the Benevolent or the Malevolent, or what's the one where the good AI like take care of everything? Malevolent.
I'm not sure.
I think that's the right word. Anyway, where the Malevolent or the one that does all the good stuff, will.
Oh, Benevolent. Yeah. Yeah. Benevolent is good. Malevolent is bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Will it, thank you. Will it actually do things in the physical world or put us in a virtual world? Because at least in virtual world, you don't need to deal with, limited resource constraints. So I guess in the culture in this book, there was some resource constraints, but because AIs were in control, they like controlled everything. Is that how that worked? Like supply chain, there wasn't a want or a need for things.
Yeah, there were no resource constraints within the confines of the culture. Other areas of the galactic universe had struggles, but the culture itself was perfect.
Looking for an exciting space adventure book, a romantic young adult story, and a fantastic sci-fi read? Get The Foundra by award-winning author Emmanuel M. Arriaga today and prepare to feed your imagination with never-ending thrill ride.
I think AI just will open up more possibilities, right? And when people say AI will kill jobs, not saying that the statement is incorrect, but it's a bit misplaced in the sense that like AI, just like computing, is a revolution of sort, right? You have the industrial revolution that came with a lot of things. And then after that, you had the agricultural revolution. Wait, those were different, right? Or were they the same?
Say that one more time.
The industrial revolution and the agricultural revolution were two different things, right?
Yes. So the industrial revolution was after the after the food revolution, because in order to get industrial, you need sustainable food supply for everyone. Because sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I guess I was more like approving. I was being a cheerleader.
Thank you. Once you have food, because the biggest hurdle for any human development is food, because if everyone's making their own food resources, everyone's time goes into that. But once food resources can be bought and purchased at affordable prices, that pushes people to tinker and spend their time doing other things. So yeah, what did you use the terminology for food revolution? I forgot. I apologize.
Oh, I say agricultural revolution.
Yeah, agricultural revolution will be before an industrial revolution.
Okay, cool. So you have the industrial revolution after the agricultural revolution. Now, I wasn't there, so I don't know if people were saying, oh, the industry is killing all the food jobs and things like that. But it's part of the, I want to say, almost natural evolution of things, right? Because as more possibility open up, some jobs just go away, either because they're not necessarily needed anymore or because they evolve, in a sense that the job itself exists, but the so yeah, like a software engineer, for example, in the 80s, right, versus a software engineer today. Yes, they code, but from a knowledge standpoint, like a software engineer back in the days, from what I hear, had to know quite a bit to be efficient at their job, versus today where like the barrier of entry is just not that high. Now, is that irrelevant of whether that's a good or a bad thing? It just speaks of the evolution of the space that we're in. So as we make more discoveries, and in this case, AI, because computer science is a new field, right? The field is what, 30, 40 years old now?
I think information theory was in Bell Labs, so sometime between the 50s and 60s.
So a little bit over that.
But I don't remember when we first started, because the first real technical computer was the...
So I'm Googling right now, how old is the computer science field?
Yeah.
In the 60s.
Yeah, so I think there's multiple industrial revolutions, it looks like. So we have the coal revolution, which happened in the 1700s. We had the gas revolution happen in the 1800s. We had the electronics and nuclear revolution that happened in the 1960s. And then we had the internet age revolution, for internet and renewable energy, which happened in the 2000s. And so I think, we've had multiple industrial revolutions that have drastically changed society in some way or another, that have led to the loss of some jobs and the creation of other jobs.
So historically, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think, and I think we're on the cusp of the next revolution, which is the artificial intelligence revolution. But I think it'll be different in the way that I don't know that new jobs, I think it's actually going to permanently eliminate jobs in some fashion, right? Because if we look at some of these other areas, you are able to skill people in the new realm of technologies, and people, skill up and are able to, retrain and become software engineers, for example, right? But in the area of artificial intelligence and more particular, like intelligent machines, right, that are capable of manipulating things, right?
Growing their code, right? Or like adding their code, or air quotes evolving. I think that's the key factor, so that you don't necessarily have somebody actually coding the machine.
Exactly.
It's self-growth, it's self-replicating and self-changing.
Yeah. And so I think when that revolution happens, when we finally walk, I think it'll probably be two phases, right? Like I think we'll have the artificial intelligence revolution, which will be, kind of the Max, what you were talking about before, right? Where it's just like the machines, are able to, be much more helpful, and end up simplifying industries and things like that in ways that we didn't expect. But then we have the machine revolution essentially when that happens, where that actually leads to the elimination of work completely.
So Kurt did a great video on this. Highly recommend watching. So, and then I've read other books. I forget exactly. So forgive me, I don't have all my sources, but essentially if you look at the history of work, when we transitioned from horse-drawn carriages to driving, industries changed, but more jobs became available. So for horses, you had the horsing shoe stables, and you had, wagon dealers and stuff like that, correct? So, but when you developed the car, you now had wheels, you now had rubber, you now had mechanics, you now had a whole engineering of metallurgy on how to make the metal. So typically more jobs replace the outgoing jobs. I don't remember who was Kurzgesagt or exactly who talks about the fact that every time you typically have an industry revolution like this, you gain more than you lose. However, this is where, Emmanuel, to your discussion, this is where things change, where and a great example of this is driving. So Andrew Wong talked about this in his campaign for universal basic income, how once we have self-driving, whenever that happens, essentially all the truckers' jobs are gone. So we already have an issue where we don't have enough truck drivers currently, and it's about 3 million people drive trucks. All those jobs are gone, and they're not going to be replaced because, one, why would you replace a human unsafe driver with a automated driver that can drive 24/7, do everything? Because right now, human drivers can only drive like 18 hours a day, or they have limits, and even sitting around doing nothing will impact how many hours they can drive, even if they're just sitting on a dock waiting for a truck. This is where the logistics issues we've had has completely messed up the trucking industry, because people were sitting waiting to be loaded in LA where they're waiting for stuff to come off the ships, but then their drive time was expired for the day because they were just sitting, even though they weren't driving, but due to regulations, because they're in the truck in the seat, they can't do anything for X numbers of hours. So once you replace that with a fully automated truck driver, and then you can make essentially exponential, and basically demand is fully filled, where demand and supply will saturate. And the bigger problem, at least Andrew Wong talks about this, and I think there is an issue to say, Emmanuel, you were talking about retraining. At least in the United States, other places of the world are a little bit different. Not everybody wants to get retrained, especially I don't see a truck driver becoming a programmer. I'm not saying he can't. I'm not saying he shouldn't, but if he doesn't want to, or if that's not an inclined skill set of his, what's his other options? Because relearning something at 55 or in that range is going to be very difficult.
Can I interject really quickly?
Go for it.
So the thing with that is that yes, we have the boot camps and some organizations, right, that sort of made a business out of it. But I feel like it should fall on the government to have programs and whatever in place where folks have the option to get the necessary skills that would allow them to, quote unquote, survive and make a living in the current state of the economy, when or get new skills that are relevant in the current economy, when their current skills are no longer viable. Right now, we don't have that.
Well, but you're also assuming there will be replacement skill sets, and that's the question here for AI is, once self-driving is completed, then drivers are no longer, driving is no longer required, and that is a low barrier of entry skill set. Not truck driving, but any type of driving. Truck driving requires a little bit more of a skill set. And then right now they're already testing artificial intelligence to do project management. So they've tested artificial intelligences that will go to the gig economy, send projects to different people, and then bring it together. So the problem is that would be, and I agree with you on the fundamental level of we need to have support system for people who lose their job to automation. But I think we can't make the assumption that there will be something to replace those jobs with.
Well, not necessarily to replace those jobs, right? But because again, you have to do something, right? I'm assuming, in a sense that you need money to be able to pay your bills. And if you're doing something that's no longer relevant, and God forbid you lose your job, you're going to have to find another job, right?
Yeah.
And for that, they should be like, okay, well, AI made this job obsolete, but what other jobs are available where certain skill can translate over, or maybe the learning curve is not that high? And it could have something to do with tech, but it doesn't necessarily have to. The idea is putting people in position to where they can get some skills and get some, at least a variety of jobs, versus the current situation we have now where pretty much everybody or a large number of people are fighting to get a job at McDonald's and Walmart and so on and so forth. Jobs that were historically reserved, or at least traditionally, let me not say reserved, but traditionally those jobs were held by, kids, college students, people that were, it's a job that you got to get a little bit of money, not necessarily that you got to, make a living out of, in a sense of like being part-time, not necessarily being like a manager or some of those higher positions.
Well, and
so one quick thing. So to tie this back into sci-fi though, because I think there are some authors that explore kind of the end states, right, for these universes where you kind of have that automation that takes place. Two that stand out to me are the world of Altered Carbon and the world of The Expanse, right? Because I think if you look at The Expanse, Earth, the vast majority of people on Earth are on some form of universal basic income, which, in the terms of Earth, like is not a great living. It's enough to live, but not much else, right? And so, they have extensive lottery systems where people can actually get into skilled professions and actually, do something that, allows them to have a higher quality of life. But it's rare, right? Income inequality and all that stuff is like a significant issue in the Expanse universe, right?
Same in the front lines. In the front lines, they like everybody on basically lives in like these kind of slum towers and whatnot, essentially very similar to Dread in their mega blocks. So
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I kind of interrupted.
Yeah, and so I think like we have how that plays out in the Expanse, and I think it's I think it's something that they played in Altered Carbon. It's a little bit different, right? Because the technology advancement there is immortality, right? That's like the play in the stacks, right? And it would be interesting to talk about this in terms of like what does it mean to be human and consciousness, but get started in this area, right? With like Altered Carbon. Because people live for so long, you have basically like different classes of people. You have the super wealthy immortals, right? Who exist, and live in these high towers, right? That, is separate from the rest of humanity, in these sky cities. And then you have the dredges of society, which are everybody else, where you could even potentially lose your body, right? Because, from debt, and end up, having your stack put on ice, right? Until, your family can afford to, get you a body, to put your stack in, right? So it's, everyone has immortality, but not equally, right? And so it's it plays around with it in a different concept, because then it becomes like this debt game, right? Where it's just like, for people to exist, they end up getting indebted into things, right? And then if they can't pay their bills, then they lose out on the opportunity to exist, which is kind of a dystopian world when you think about it, right? Because it's just like, imagine having debt, today, and then for whatever reason you can't pay your bills, and so they repossess your body, right, as a form of payment, until someone can pay off your bills, at which point then you can get a body. It might not be your own body, right? It'll be somebody else's body. So then, like, what does it mean to be human in that case, right? It's not our bodies, it's the stack, right? That is your consciousness.
Or the sleeve is what they called the body. And that was one of the grueling scenes in the beginning of the first episode, so no spoilers, of the what's it called? Of Altered Carbon, is when a little girl is thrown into a new sleeve that's like an 80-year-old woman. Even though like the girl's like 8, she was murdered. So her original sleeve is dead. And now she's like an 80-year-old woman because her parents couldn't afford a clone or couldn't afford anything. So she got whatever sleeve was available. And yeah, it's just so disheartening. But at least in Altered Carbon, to my knowledge, they didn't have any way to put you into virtual reality, right? So that's where there's another, the Amazon Prime series Upload is very interesting. So when you die, you get uploaded and you get to live forever in like a computer, in a computer, but you're not allowed to work because they don't want, artificial intelligence or, however we define, your consciousness uploaded in a computer. They don't want you working because they don't want you taking a job away from jobs from actual people. So you're not allowed to work, but things in the virtual world still cost money. So you have to basically be a billionaire or, be upper class to even afford to live in that particular side, in the, heaven realm type place. Jumping back though, I want to kind of discuss a little bit more though about how I think we assume there's going to be replacements in jobs. And yeah, not to necessarily go political or whatever, because I don't think that's the purpose of our show. It's more to stick to the sci-fi and stuff. But in basic, in terms of that, like at least with truck driving, if you did a tax or did something, because here's how I see it, at least with the truck driving example, like we have 3 million truck drivers in the US. Once automation takes over, there's going to be more than 3 million trucks driving at any given time. And so if you added a small tax or small levy, then you could pay for people, and that would either give them their salary back or give them something. But I think depending on your faith or depending on your, philosophy, sitting around doing nothing may not be a good way of life. So, because, some argue that we are meant to do something with our lives and meant to have a work or have a purpose. And so, but finding that when, essentially everything's been automated is, I think going to be a very interesting human quality of how do we find our purpose when we don't have to do anything. But I think that also gives us a lot of opportunity to what do you want out of life to find, your specific purpose.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the, if you look at, say, the Expanses world, right? Like, where does UBI come from in that universe, right? Well, it's just Earth itself is a very rich, prosperous planet. It's still the superpower in the solar system. And so like they can afford just to give people UBI, right? And so it's interesting because they, I don't know how they've structured their society to afford it, but they've built it into their economics, right? Their economic engine. They've just created this form of living. But like it's shown in these series, like it's a baseline form of living, right? Like it's not an ideal life.
It's not living. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Because it's literally called basic. Oh, you're on basic.
Yeah.
And it's also, you're kind of, I think, remind me if I'm wrong, you were kind of shunned, or like it was socially like, oh, you're on basic, or like the upper echelon.
It's just classism, right? Like, classism exists in the world today. And I think it'll become even more extreme in a society like that, right? Where it's like you have your middle class, you have your, it's essentially, right? Like everyone's low income who's on basic. And to get into middle class, you essentially have to win the lottery, right? Like that's pretty much the society. Or maybe it's not even middle class. Maybe it's just like to get into the upper middle class, right? You have to win the lottery. So like there's this drastic difference between, people on basic and then like having a skilled profession. Because I would say the middle class people are actually like the people on Mars, even the Belters, right? Because they probably have a better life than people on basic do on Earth.
Depends on what station
their life is terrible.
It depends on what station. I do think that's one of the issues I do have. Like, I love The Expanse. I think it's one of the greatest, like one of the top tier echelon of science fiction. But I don't actually think we'd have as many Belters or as much people going into space like that. I think automation would take over that. I just don't foresee the human casualty level, at least that we see The Expanse of like, oh, he lost his arm, so we're just, going to Sirius to get ice or whatever. I see that being fully automated. I don't necessarily see people going out there. But I do think it depended on like which planet, where you came from. Like, I don't think it was biscuits and gravy for anyone except elites, right? Unless you're born on like the moon or something, you're not really like,
Yeah, I think it depends because if you look at I think if you look at the Expanse timeline, like the Expanse doesn't take place that far in the future. I think it's like 100 years or 200 years or something like that. I forget the exact timeline.
I don't think it's ever stated, but it's kind of assumed. Like the biggest leap forward is the Epstein drive, and space travel becomes essentially a commodity.
Yeah, but I think it's apparently 2350.
Okay. So
that's 300 years. Interesting. Because I think it to your point, like that's the Star Trek time frame.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, like Star Trek, I think takes place.
I'm just familiar with Star Trek. I was a Stargate guy.
24th, so ranging from the 22nd century to the 24th century.
Okay.
So that would be actually earlier than The Expanse.
Oh, would it?
Yeah, because like Enterprise, for example, the Enterprise season 1 from that show would be 2150.
So that would make sense, like the first original spacecraft, like first crewed flight type of thing.
Yeah, it's like Star Trek season 1. So like with Kirk would be 2260. So and so basically the time frame from The Expanse would be the time frame of the Next Generation, which is 2360. So pretty much it paints two different progressions of technology. So The Expanse is a slower progression of technology with not as much automation. Whereas if you have like the Star Trek universe, for example, you know, if you look at a ship like the Enterprise, it's mostly automated, right? Like, like the entire ship is controlled by one console, right? The massive starship, right? You know, so it's like, you know, you have the entire bridge crew, which can manage the functions of the entire ship, you know, which is like 6 people, you know, a ship that contains, you know, thousands, you know, if hundreds, if not thousands of people, depending on the ship.
Yeah.
Versus The Expanse, where like you need a whole crew to man, like, you know, a whole crew of 6 people mans like a ship.
Yeah.
You know, that's like a small, you know, freighter, you know, that, you know, is a dwarfing, you know, a dwarf compared to like one of those Star Trek ships, right? So I think it's a different, I think their timeline's off.
Thank you for listening. Check out our podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts if you enjoyed the show. For more books and inspiring stories from today's authors, please subscribe to our podcast.